Hey everybody, just thought I'd put a little video together for you guys on an interesting topic, which is when not to capture. See, capturing material in chess is one of those things where, all other things being equal, it's generally a good thing. It's advantageous to remove your opponent's material because that means that there are fewer squares on the board that your opponent occupies. However, it ain't always the case. Now, for example, I've got 12 different examples, all of which have come from my own games that I've analysed in the past, okay? Here's a really simple one. This is a game with my opponent's rated in the 1000s, I'm in the 1200s, and we've both got 12 minutes on the clock. So this is obviously a rapid game, and my opponent captures a pawn with a bishop, and I decide to capture the bishop on f3. Sorry, the pawn on f3. Why is that a bad idea? Well, I'm glad you asked, because the pawn on f3 turned out to be protected by a knight. Okay, so the most mundane and obvious and simple thing, but it doesn't matter. You could be rated 1252 in rapid and you still do something completely ridiculously stupid like that. Now, at this point in the game, I was up material, so but that pretty much just simply evens things out, so quite a ridiculous state of affairs anyway. And then obviously there's a risk of, anyway, don't matter about that, so don't do stupid stuff, right? Before you capture something, is that thing protected? Are you going to lose the attacker? Alright, let's move on to slightly more interesting situations. Okay, so here black captures the knight. Okay, but what is wrong with that move? So throughout the video, please do press pause if you want. So, okay, bishop comes here, and yeah, we're threatening to move the knight. The knight can't move with check, that's important because the knight and king are on different colours. But we are threatening to, for example, capture this pawn and attack the rook with a discovered attack on the queen. Okay, but here black has options. You always have options unless you've completely forced situation, right? But you usually have options before getting into a completely forced situation. Now here, knight takes knight is exactly the wrong move. The reason is because d takes e5 and white regains the piece, but now he's going to capture more material because now we have a fork on the king and the knight. All right, pretty straightforward again. Next example. Okay, so here we have knight c4 and rook captures h2. Free pawn, hurrah! Although it isn't. Why is it not a free pawn? What did I do stupidly wrong? Here rated 1300 in rapid. Well, I've walked into a different kind of a fork. Right? Bishop f4 is a bishop fork. You interpose the bishop between two pieces on the same diagonal, and the king has to move. And in fact here, white actually comes in with a stunning checkmate. Doesn't even bother capturing the rook. But totally ridiculous scenario, and totally avoidable as well. Right, next up. Queen captures a pawn here. Okay. Knight to f6 is played. And what is wrong with capturing this pawn? Okay. Can you see? We're okay here. With this move, white has really put himself in some trouble. Pause if you need to. Okay, it's simply that now this queen is, in fact, even on that square, there's a similar situation. You look at where the knight is, right? The knight is a long knight's move, a long L away from the queen, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Whereas a normal knight's move is this, okay? A long knight's move is this, and that means that's one of those patterns that a knight can jump and attack, okay? So we attack the queen. Obviously the queen is going to be forced to move, but after the knight moves here, look what else has happened. The bishop is opened up against g2. right? So the queen cannot move onto the g file because she'll just get taken anyway, right? So the queen goes back here. Bishop takes g2 check, and the only legal move here now is king g1, right? And then the bishop moves here again with check. It's actually a double check, so knight takes bishop isn't possible, and the next turn the queen is going to get captured, and this position white resigns the game. Okay, and moving on. Oh, I'm playing Christina in this one. Okay, so in this game, I push forward with f4, okay, and Christina decides to capture. But this is a mistake, okay? Why? Bishop takes f3 is actually checkmate in that situation, okay? So here, capturing was absolutely not the right idea. I think even king here, takes would have been fine, you know, but this is one of those situations, 4 minutes on the clock, walking into a dead mate is pretty unpleasant, okay? So I think the point that I really want to get across with this is do not automatically capture stuff that looks free, okay? And specifically, do not automatically recapture either. So here's another example. This is only 10 moves into a Vienna. Black captures a pawn on e5. Knight recaptures. Oh no. 28 minutes on the clock, right? And I blunder my queen. Right? So just do not automatically recapture. Pawn takes. Pawn takes here is just as bad because it also reveals that both these pieces are actually pinned, right? So in this situation, I should have realized that is pinned. If pawn takes, then it means the knight is pinned, okay? So here I should have probably just dodged the queen out of the way, maybe with ideas about this, with a checkmate threat, push the pawn, win the rook, okay? But instead, I decided to grab a pawn because I was greedy and blundered my queen and actually went on to win the game bizarrely. My opponent here is rated 1385. Okay, let's move on. We've got 6 more. White retreats a queen. White's rated 1324 and is actually +3 in this situation because White's got an extra minor piece. Okay, we push a pawn. King moves back to g1. Okay, and here I capture on f3. Queen recaptures. Okay, and this is the mistake. Why is this a mistake? Okay, so I mean the threat. Why did the king just retreat? Because the knight can't move, right? This piece is pinned, and this move attacks the pinned piece, right? Very common tactic. Okay, so White figures this out, retreats the king. I capture here. White should not have recaptured with the queen. Recapturing with the pawn, maybe there's a case for that. Recapture the queen, and the queen, we have to see, was the only defender of that rook here. Okay, so there's a couple of options here. I could have captured the rook with check, then king comes out here, but still I win a rook. In the end I capture the queen, recaptures, and then I win the rook. Okay, and that was that, and go on to win that game as well. Okay, so this is the point. We just need to snip at that wire, right, between you've captured my piece and I must recapture straight away. Here's another good example. Okay, I capture a pawn here, right? White now captures on f5. Now, it would be very tempting in this situation to recapture the pawn, but that would be absolutely pointless in this situation. Okay, recapture the pawn, rook takes with check. Okay, this queen can come diving into here at any point, right? So at this point in the game, I just push g5. And this is a very important thing. Sometimes your opponent's material helps you. Okay, so you've got to get into this this habit of looking at the board and telling the story of what the board actually says, not what you think it ought to say. Right? We think in our consciousness, capturing material is good, and yeah, 95% of the time maybe it is, but here it would have been a huge mistake. Right, but here pushing the pawn, now I'm actually down an exchange here in this game, but I do go on to win. Okay, so let me show you how. Right, we trade off queens, put my rook on here, and now I have this nice pawn. In fact, I'm still down in material actually. White has 5 pawns, I have 6, but he's up the exchange. Okay, rook comes across, but this pawn wall here is pretty impenetrable, right? King comes up, we trade off again, but I've now grabbed an extra pawn. So yeah, he's still up the exchange, I'm up 2 pawns, and it's just a nice little endgame here. The knight's defending this pawn, so I don't have to worry about that. Okay, check, win another pawn, and even though he's got the more powerful piece, the rook, it all means nothing because my pawns just come in and destroy white. Okay. So here's another example of exactly when your opponent's material can be beneficial to you, and where you really, really do want to keep it on the board. And this is the tactic that I call the human shield. Okay. Now in this situation, black plays pawn to h3. All right, and it'd be very tempting to capture the pawn here with my g-pawn. However, that would just invite rook to come down, okay, with check, king comes here, rook here, king would have to go there. You know, it's just very, very complicated. In the game, I just play g3, okay? And now this pawn is only defended by the rook, so now this rook is actually tied to the defense of that pawn. This rook is not defending it anymore. If this rook ever goes away, I can grab that pawn, right? Completely different balance of power now in this situation. Okay, so that's the human shield idea. Your opponents can never capture their own pieces. Here, black would love to pick up that pawn and throw it on the floor, but he can't. It's not allowed. Okay, and there we go. So a few more little examples of this. Here, I played my knight back to a7, pawn captures on a6, and again b6. Right, so here I might be able to get my king into there at some point in time, but to capture here, right, it just invites the rook to recapture, and you know, queen might come in, might castle, and just really open up the a file. But with his own pawn blocked at the front of the a file, even though yes, it's tying up my knight, right, still a far preferable situation. A couple more examples. Okay, so here, I play my knight in here, black recaptures, bishop takes, all right, and pawn takes here on h3. Now, again, I just ignore that pawn, right? I could have captured the pawn, which would have opened up the entire g file pointing at my king, but I don't do that, okay? Instead, I push c3, counterattack the knight, pawn takes, and let's move the rook, right? I'm using this pawn as a hostage. It's a human shield, right? Black cannot ever, ever get through that piece. Black could capture any of these other pieces on the board, but black can never capture that pawn. All right, last example, okay, when not to capture. Okay, queen comes, just retreats there to h5. I move my queen across to g2, and now this is just a trap. It's a common old garden trap. Looks like, okay, that pawn was... So with this move, black captures this pawn and is now double attacking this pawn. Right? Now, I move my queen away, removing the only attacker of that pawn, and black goes, woohoo, thank you very much. But then it gets worse. Can you see what happens to black now? Simply rook f1, and we have a pin on the queen. There's only one way out of it, bishop here. but then e4, king has to move, and he's lost a whole piece, right? And goes on to lose the game. So there you go, guys. So the point of this is stop, right? Something's under attack, something's been captured. Stop, think, read the board. Okay, it's not, recapturing is not always the right thing. Capturing something that looks undefended is not always the right thing. You've got to play every single move on its own merits, all right? Okay, that's basically it. Hope this has been useful for you guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all soon.